I used to think silence meant peace. That if two people stopped arguing, it meant they had found a way to live quietly together. But I was wrong. Sometimes silence is the loudest sign that something is breaking. My name is Michael. I'm 43 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I understood what it meant to be a husband. To work hard, to provide, to keep things steady even when life got rough. But lately, I've realized that somewhere along the way, I confused stability with distance. I mistook calm for connection. My wife's name was Laura. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to say much to fill a room. When she laughed, the sound had warmth to it, soft, but full of life. In the early years of our marriage, that laugh was everywhere. It echoed through the kitchen on Sunday mornings while we made breakfast together. It slipped through the open windows when she talked to her sister on the phone. It used to be the soundtrack of my evenings when I came home from work and found her sitting on the couch, a blanket over her legs, waiting for me to join her. But now, the house is quiet. Too quiet. I remember the first time I realized something had changed. It wasn't one big fight. It wasn't even a specific moment. It was just a feeling. A heaviness that settled between us like fog that wouldn't lift. I came home from work one evening, later than usual. The sky was already dark, and the streetlights had just flickered on. I saw the faint light of the TV from the living room as I opened the front door. Usually, Laura would call out, "Hey, you're home," or "How was your day?" But that night, nothing. She was sitting there on the couch, her arms folded loosely, eyes fixed on the screen. A cooking show played in the background, but I could tell she wasn't really watching it. Her expression was blank, distant. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile as I took off my shoes. "Long day." She looked up for a moment and gave a small nod. "Yeah, something like that." I hesitated, waiting for her to say more, but she didn't. I wanted to ask about her day, about what was wrong, but instead, I just walked into the kitchen, pretending everything was fine. That's how it began. The pretending. At first, it was little things. She stopped reaching for my hand when we sat on the couch. She started eating dinner earlier, saying she wasn't hungry when I got home. Her goodnight kisses became shorter, colder, like a habit, not affection. And I told myself it was just a phase. People change. Marriages go through quiet spells. I thought if I worked a little harder, if I made her coffee in the mornings or planned a weekend trip, it would go back to how it used to be. But it didn't. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. The bed beside me was empty. I thought maybe she was in the bathroom, but the light wasn't on. I walked out to the hallway, and there she was, sitting at the dining table with her laptop open. The glow from the screen lit her face, and she looked sad. Not crying, not angry, just sad in a way that made my chest tighten. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. She jumped slightly, closing the laptop halfway. "Yeah, just couldn't." "Everything okay?" She forced a faint smile. "Yeah, go back to bed, Michael. I'll be there soon." I nodded and turned around, but something made me stop halfway down the hall. I glanced back. She was staring at the laptop again, biting her lip, as if debating whether to write something or delete it. That image stayed with me for days. At work, I found myself replaying small moments. Her sighs, her silences, the way she avoided my eyes during breakfast. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the truth is, I was afraid of the answer. So instead, I buried myself in work. I convinced myself that providing for her was enough, that being reliable mattered more than being emotionally present. But deep down, I knew I was losing her, not because of a single mistake, but because of years of neglect I didn't even notice building up. We had been married 12 years by then. No kids, not by choice, but because life didn't work out that way. We tried for years, went through doctors and tests, and after a while, we just stopped talking about it. That silence, too, became part of our story. Maybe that's when the distance began. The moment we both realized some dreams don't come true, no matter how much love you pour into them. A few weeks later, I found her standing by the window on a rainy morning. She was holding a mug, staring outside. The sound of rain hitting the glass filled the room. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She didn't turn around. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. I don't know. Like, the things we thought would make us happy, maybe they weren't the right things." I stepped closer, unsure what to say. "Are you unhappy, Laura?" She turned then, and for a moment, her eyes met mine. There was no anger, no tears, just exhaustion. I don't know what I am anymore. And before I could respond, she walked away. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing beside me. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to tell her that whatever it was, we could fix it. But I didn't, because something in her tone earlier told me this wasn't something I could fix overnight. It was deeper than that. It was something broken inside her, and maybe inside me, too. That was the night I realized we were two people sharing a house, not a home. In the mornings, I started noticing small things. She changed her perfume. She started dressing differently when she went out. She began taking long walks alone after dinner, something she never did before. Once, I offered to go with her, but she smiled faintly and said, "It's okay. I just need some air." I watched her through the window that evening as she walked down the street, her umbrella barely keeping the rain off her shoulders. For a moment, I had this strange, irrational thought that she was walking away from me in slow motion, and I couldn't move to stop her. At work, people told me I looked tired. My boss even suggested I take a few days off. I told him I was fine. That's what I told everyone. I'm fine. Those two words became my shield. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. Every night, I came home to the same silence, the same unspoken distance. And yet, I kept pretending that dinner together meant we were okay, pretending that goodnight kisses meant love, pretending that this was just a rough patch, not the slow, quiet end of something that once meant everything to me. I didn't know it then, but all that pretending would soon fall apart. And when it did, it wouldn't be because of a fight or an argument. It would be because of what I found, something that changed how I saw my wife, my marriage, and myself forever. The following weeks blurred together, a quiet routine wrapped in politeness. We still talked, but only about ordinary things, groceries, bills, errands, the weather. It was like our marriage had been replaced with a list of shared responsibilities. Every time I tried to bring up something deeper, how she was feeling, how we were doing, she'd deflect it. She'd smile, tell me she was just tired, and change the subject. And I let her, because part of me didn't want to hear the truth. One night, after dinner, I was washing dishes when I noticed her standing by the counter, scrolling through her phone. She seemed focused, her expression serious. I said, "You've been on your phone a lot lately." She glanced up, startled, then gave a small laugh. "Oh, just chatting with an old friend from college. She moved back into town." "Yeah? That's nice," I said. "Anyone I know?" "No, you probably wouldn't remember her." She turned away quickly, pretending to tidy the counter, and something about the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the truth is, I'd never heard her mention that friend before. The next day, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Her car was in the driveway, but the living room was empty. Then I heard soft music coming from the bedroom. For a moment, I hesitated outside the door. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew, deep down, that whatever I was about to see would change something inside me. When I opened the door, she was sitting on the bed, wearing one of her old sweaters, headphones on. She jumped when she saw me. "Hey," I said carefully. "Didn't mean to startle you." She pulled off the headphones. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in. I got off early. Thought we could grab dinner somewhere." She smiled faintly. "That's sweet, but I'm really tired. Maybe another night." I nodded. "Sure." But as I turned to leave, my eyes caught something on the nightstand. A small notebook, its pages slightly bent. I'd never seen it before. I didn't say anything, just noticed. But that image stuck with me all night. That small book, the way she'd quickly moved it aside when I looked at it. Over the next few days, I tried not to think about it. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just her journaling again. She used to write when she was stressed. But still, there was something about her lately, a sort of restlessness I couldn't explain. She started going to yoga classes on Thursday evenings. I wanted to believe that's what they were. But every time I asked, her answers were vague. "How was class?" "It was fine." "What do you guys do?" "Oh, stretching, meditation." She'd smile, but her eyes would drift away as she said it. One Thursday night, I sat alone at the dinner table, the food getting cold in front of me. Rain tapped gently on the window, and the clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. When I finally heard her car pull into the driveway, it was past 9. She walked in, her hair slightly damp, her cheeks flushed. "Hey," I said. "How was yoga?" "Good," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Really good." Something in her voice was lighter, almost too light. I watched her as she walked to the kitchen, humming softly to herself. That's when I noticed a faint scent, not her perfume, but cologne. A man's cologne. My throat tightened. I told myself it was probably from the gym, maybe another student. But the smell lingered too long, too close. That night, she fell asleep instantly. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. It wasn't anger I felt. It was fear. Fear that maybe, finally, I was about to lose her for good. The next morning, she was quiet. She moved around the kitchen quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Laura," I said gently, "are we okay?" She froze, holding a cup of coffee halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You seem far away lately." She sighed, setting the cup down. "Michael, not everything has to mean something. I've just been stressed. Work's been insane. I get that, but please," she interrupted softly, "don't make a big deal out of this. I just need some space." "Space?" I repeated, my chest tightening. "From what?" "From everything. Just some air to breathe, okay?" She turned away before I could answer, and I stood there, feeling like someone had quietly shut a door in my heart. I spent that weekend trying to give her the space she asked for. I mowed the lawn, fixed the leaking faucet, took long walks by myself. When I came home, I'd hear her on the phone, her voice soft, almost whispering. When I entered the room, she'd hang up or say she was just talking to her sister. But I knew it wasn't her sister. She had a different tone when she talked to family. Lighter, more natural. This tone, it was quieter, more careful. Sunday night, I found her sitting in the car in the driveway, engine off, lights out. She was just sitting there, staring at her hands. I walked up and gently tapped the window. She startled, rolling it down halfway. "Hey," she said quickly. "You scared me." "I didn't mean to." "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said too fast. "I was just listening to music." But there was no music playing. She stepped out, brushed past me, and went inside. And once again, I didn't say anything. I told myself to trust her, to not jump to conclusions. But something inside me, that quiet, aching instinct that knows when love is slipping away, whispered that I was being blind. That night, I dreamed of her standing on the other side of a glass wall. I could see her, hear her voice faintly, but I couldn't reach her. And every time I tried, she'd take a step back, her image fading into the distance. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with sweat. The sun was barely rising, and she was already gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter. Went for a walk. Needed to clear my head. The handwriting was rushed. I stared at it for a long time before crumpling it into my hand. That morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. Kids running to school buses. A dog barking down the street. And I kept wondering, when did I lose her? Was it the late nights at work? The times I forgot anniversaries? The nights I came home too tired to talk? I thought about the woman I married. The way she used to look at me with trust, with warmth. And now, she couldn't even hold my gaze for more than a few seconds. It's strange how love fades. Not like an explosion, but like a slow leak you don't notice until everything feels empty. That evening, I came home early again. Her car was there. I walked quietly inside. The house was silent except for the faint sound of a drawer closing upstairs. "Laura," I called out. No answer. I went up to our bedroom. The door was slightly open. She wasn't there, but the closet door was. Half open. Inside, the faint smell of her perfume lingered in the air. Her clothes hung neatly, but one of the boxes from the top shelf was on the floor. I don't know why, but something in me hesitated. It wasn't like me to snoop. But the box wasn't where it usually was. I stepped closer. It was filled with things I didn't recognize. Papers, envelopes, an old scarf, a photo frame face down. And tucked between them was a small envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was hers. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a note. But before I could read it, I heard footsteps behind me. "Michael." I turned. She was standing at the door, her face pale, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. I just saw the box. Why are you going through my things?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something raw in her eyes. Not anger, but fear. "I wasn't," I said quickly. Your name's on. Give it to me." She stepped forward, her hand trembling. "Laura, please, just tell me what's going on." "Give it back, Michael." Her voice was shaking now, her eyes filling with tears. I slowly handed her the envelope. She snatched it, holding it against her chest like it was something fragile. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "You shouldn't have seen that." And before I could ask what she meant, she walked past me and out of the room. That night, she slept in the guest room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling again, my mind racing. Whatever was in that box, whatever was written in that letter, it was something she didn't want me to see. And somehow, I knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. No note this time. No sound of the coffee maker. No smell of toast. Just quiet. The house felt colder than usual, though it was a warm day outside. It's strange how absence can have a temperature. How you can feel someone missing in the air. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the chair where she usually sat. There was still a faint mark on the table from where she had spilled her tea the week before. Little things like that suddenly meant everything. I wanted to call her, to ask where she went, or just to hear her voice. But I didn't, because lately, every time I reached out, I felt her pull away a little more. At work, I couldn't focus. The numbers on the screen blurred together. The voices in the office faded into background noise. I kept seeing her face from the night before, the way she looked when she caught me with that envelope. The fear, the sadness. What was she hiding? And why did she look more scared than angry? When I got home that evening, she was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen. "Hey," I said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "We need to talk." My chest tightened. Those 4 words, "we need to talk," always means something heavy. I sat down across from her. She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry about last night. I shouldn't have yelled." "It's okay," I said softly. "But Laura, what was in that box?" She looked down at her hands. "It's personal. I know. But I'm your husband." She shook her head. "That's exactly why I can't explain. Not right now." I felt a sharp ache in my chest. "Then at least tell me. Are you seeing someone else?" Her eyes widened. "No. God, no, Michael. It's not that." "Then what?" She looked away, silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "It's something I should have told you years ago. But I didn't know how." And just as I was about to ask more, she stood up suddenly. "Please, just give me a little time. I'll tell you when I'm ready. Laura, please." Her voice cracked on that word. And that was it. The conversation ended there. She went upstairs, and I sat there in the dim living room, the sound of her footsteps fading above me. The following days were filled with uneasy silence. She was distant but polite. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and pretended again, just like before. But inside, something had shifted. The curiosity had turned into fear. And fear has a way of growing roots when you let silence feed it. One evening, I was cleaning the living room when her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it. A message flashed briefly before the screen went dark again. I only saw a few words. "Did you tell him yet?" My stomach dropped. I didn't recognize the number. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the phone, my mind spinning. Who was that? And what was she supposed to tell me? When she came home later, I tried to act normal. She smiled faintly and kissed my cheek. A habit, not affection. But that text burned in my mind like fire. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room after she went to bed. The clock ticked softly on the wall. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a light rain had started again. I stared at the staircase for a long time, my thoughts tangled. I knew it was wrong to look through her things. I'd always believed in trust and privacy. But after everything, the distance, the late nights, the text message, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that box held the truth she wouldn't tell me. And maybe I wasn't ready to know the truth. But I needed to. I got up quietly, careful not to make a sound. Each step up the stairs felt heavier than the last. When I reached the bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. She was asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I walked past her to the closet. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and something floral. The box was still there, tucked on the top shelf. My hands trembled as I brought it down. Inside were things I didn't recognize, a folded sweater, some old photos, a few envelopes. One photo caught my eye, Laura, standing with a man I didn't know. They were younger, maybe in their 20s. Her smile looked real, wide, carefree, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. My heart pounded as I flipped the photo over. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "Me and Daniel, Summer before everything changed. Daniel. The name meant nothing to me. But the way she wrote it, like it was someone who once meant everything, made me feel sick. Underneath the photo was a stack of letters tied with a thin ribbon. I hesitated. Then, with shaking fingers, I untied it. The first letter began. Dear Laura, I still think about the choice you made that night. I don't blame you for leaving. Maybe one day, he'll understand why you couldn't tell him. I stopped reading. The words blurred as I read them again. Couldn't tell him. Understand why you left. My hands shook as I turned to the next one. I saw the photo you sent me of the house. It looks perfect. I'm glad you found peace, even if it's not with me. Just know, you did the right thing. I sat down on the floor, the letters scattered around me, my heart thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The right thing? Peace. Not with me. My head spun. I didn't understand. I didn't hear her footsteps until she was standing right behind me. Michael, she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned. She was at the doorway, her face pale, tears already streaming down her cheeks. What is this? I asked, my voice barely steady. Who is Daniel? She took a step forward, shaking her head. Please don't do this. Don't do what? Read letters addressed to you that talk about me. She covered her mouth with her hand. I was going to tell you. I swear I was. I just didn't know how. Tell me what? Her voice broke. He was someone I loved. Before you. I stared at her. Before me. She nodded slowly. Before everything. Before the life we built. Then why are you hiding his letters? Why keep them all this time? Because he's not just someone I loved, she said quietly. He's someone I lost. I felt the words hit me like a wave. Lost. She sank to her knees across from me, her voice shaking. He died, Michael. 15 years ago. For a moment, the world stopped moving. The only sound was the rain outside, tapping softly against the window. She looked down at her hands. He was my fiancé before I met you. We were engaged. There was an accident, a car crash. I never told you because I didn't want that part of my life to follow me here. I swallowed hard. Why hide it from me? Why all the secrecy? She looked at me, eyes filled with guilt. Because I never really let him go. Not completely. I thought I had, but lately, I started dreaming about him again, thinking about how different my life would have been. And I felt guilty for feeling that way while being married to you. I sat there in silence, unable to speak. All the tension, all the distance, all the quiet sadness, it suddenly made sense. She wasn't falling out of love with me because of someone else now. She was haunted by someone she lost then. She reached for my hand, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to explain grief that never really ended. Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand why she didn't trust me enough to share her pain. But all I could feel was sorrow. For her. For the version of her I never knew. For the man she lost before I ever had a chance to know her whole story. I looked around the room, at the letters, the photos, the open box. All these years, I thought I was her safe place. But she had been carrying a hidden grief, tucked neatly away behind her clothes, in the corner of a closet I never opened. We sat there for a long time, not saying much. Finally, she whispered, I think that's why I've been so distant. It's not you. It's me trying to figure out how to say goodbye again. The words cracked something inside me. I took a deep breath. Laura, I can't compete with a ghost. But I wish you had told me. We could have carried it together. Her tears fell freely now. I was afraid you'd see me differently. I do, I said honestly. But not in the way you think. We didn't fix everything that night. There was no sudden reconciliation, no dramatic promise of a new beginning. But for the first time in months, we talked, really talked. About him. About her pain. About us. And as I listened to her voice trembling through the story of her past, I realized something profound. Love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes shape, and sometimes, it hides inside people who are still learning how to live again. When she fell asleep that night, I sat by the window, listening to the rain ease into silence. I looked at the box beside me, the letters, the photos, the quiet weight of her secret, and I whispered, I wish I'd known sooner. Because maybe then, instead of pretending everything was fine, I would have seen the truth sooner. That sometimes, the person we love isn't pulling away because they stopped loving us. Sometimes, they're just lost inside memories they're still trying to forgive themselves for keeping. When I think back to where it all began, I sometimes wonder if I ever really understood what love was. Back then, Love meant laughter in a cheap cafe, long walks without checking the time, and someone remembering how you liked your coffee. It didn't seem complicated. It felt like breathing, natural, effortless, and pure. I met Sarah on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't one of those cinematic meetings where everything slows down or music plays in the background. She was standing in line at a small bookstore downtown, holding two books, one about poetry, the other about fixing old houses. Something about that mix caught my attention. It felt like she was both dreamer and doer, a balance I had never quite found in myself. When it was my turn to pay, she dropped one of her books. I bent down to pick it up, and for a brief moment our hands brushed. She smiled, not a polite smile, but one that reached her eyes. And that was it. That's how everything started. A moment so small, yet it would change every part of my life. I used to go to that bookstore on weekends. After that day, I found excuses to drop by more often. Sometimes I pretend to look for a book I already owned, just hoping to see her again. And one Saturday, she was there, sitting by the window, reading. I bought 2 coffees from the shop next door, walked over, and asked if she'd like to share a table. She hesitated, then nodded with that same quiet smile. We talked for hours that day, about books, families, places we wanted to visit, things we feared. I told her I didn't really know where I was going in life, that I was just trying to figure things out. She told me she believed people didn't need to have everything figured out, that it was okay to walk through uncertainty as long as you did it honestly. That line stuck with me for years. Even now, sometimes when I'm sitting alone, I can still hear her voice saying it softly. Those first months were simple and golden. We didn't have much, just small joys that seemed enough. We'd cook pasta together in my tiny apartment that barely fit 2 people. She'd dance in the kitchen, barefoot, humming a song from her childhood. I'd watch her, thinking how lucky I was that someone like her had chosen to share her time with me. It's strange. When life feels good, you never think about the day it might change. You just assume the warmth will last forever. Our first argument was about something silly. I forgot to call her one evening after promising I would. She didn't shout or cry. She just looked disappointed, quietly saying, "If something matters to you, you make time for it." I apologized, she forgave me, and we moved on. But that line became something I carried deep inside me, long before I realized how true it was. Sarah had this ability to see the world as a story. Every person, every day, every little moment meant something to her. I was more practical, always thinking about work, money, plans. She once said, "You live in tomorrow too much. Try living in today." I laughed it off at the time, but maybe she saw something I didn't. Maybe she already knew that my way of protecting our future would one day become the very thing that pulled us apart. A year passed like a quiet melody. We moved in together, a small apartment with peeling paint and a view of the old church tower. We called it home, even though it barely had enough space for both of us. On Sunday mornings, she'd open all the windows to let the light in, even during winter. I'd sit by the table, sipping coffee, watching her hum while folding laundry. Those small, wordless moments made me feel safe, like life had finally found its rhythm. We talked about marriage early on, not because of pressure, but because it felt inevitable. When you find someone who feels like home, you stop looking for anywhere else to go. I wasn't rich, but I promised her I'd build a life where she'd never have to worry. She said she didn't care about big houses or fancy things, just a heart that stays. At the time, I didn't realize how hard it is for a heart to stay still when the world keeps pulling it in different directions. Our engagement was small, just a dinner at her parents' house. Her father gave me a firm handshake. Her mother hugged me as if I was already family. That night, after everyone went to bed, Sarah and I sat outside on the porch. The sky was full of stars, and she rested her head on my shoulder. She said, "Promise me one thing. When things get hard, don't just shut down. Talk to me." I promised. I meant it. But life has a way of testing the promises we think we'll always keep. As we started planning the wedding, I took extra jobs to save money. I told myself I was doing it for us, for our future. But the more I worked, the less time we had together. I'd come home late, exhausted, finding her asleep on the couch surrounded by papers and color samples. She'd wake up, smile, and say, "You work too much." I'd laugh, kiss her forehead, and tell her it was temporary. But looking back, I think she already felt me drifting away, not physically, but emotionally. There's one night I'll never forget. It was raining heavily, and I got home past midnight. The lights were off, but a single candle was burning on the table. Next to it was a note she'd written. "You don't need to earn the life we already have." I stood there, holding that note, feeling both loved and guilty. I blew out the candle and went to bed without waking her. It was easier than facing the truth that maybe she didn't need me to work harder. She just needed me to be there. We got married 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, just family, close friends, and a few coworkers. She wore a simple white dress, and I remember thinking she looked like sunlight had taken human form. During our vows, her voice trembled slightly. She said, "Even if life changes us, I'll keep choosing you." Everyone clapped, laughed, cried. But somewhere deep inside, I wondered, would I be strong enough to say the same when life really did change us? Marriage, at first, was everything I thought it would be. We made our own traditions: Friday movie nights, Sunday walks, breakfast in bed once a month. We laughed easily. We loved quietly. It wasn't grand or perfect, but it was ours. Sometimes I wish I could go back to those early days and hold on to them longer, to appreciate how fragile peace can be. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from our small balcony, Sarah said something that stayed with me. She said, "Do you think love fades, or do people just stop seeing it?" I told her love doesn't fade, that it just changes shape. She smiled sadly, as if she already knew something I didn't. Now, years later, I finally understand her question. Love doesn't disappear, it just hides behind all the things we forget to say. If I close my eyes, I can still picture that time. Her laughter in the kitchen, the smell of coffee in the morning, the quiet comfort of falling asleep beside her. It was the calm before the storm, and I didn't even know the storm was coming. The first year of our marriage passed like a soft melody. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and back then, that seemed enough. We rented a small apartment on the edge of town. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the plumbing had a mind of its own. But it was ours. We filled it with mismatched furniture, secondhand dreams, and the smell of fresh paint. I remember thinking, this is what happiness looks like, not perfect, but real. Sarah got a job at a local art gallery. She loved being surrounded by colors, textures, and people who spoke through creation instead of words. Every evening, she'd come home with paint on her hands, stories in her eyes. I'd sit and listen while she talked about artists, new exhibitions, or visitors who cried in front of a painting because something inside them was touched. I didn't always understand that world, but I loved watching her glow when she talked about it. It made me feel like she belonged somewhere beautiful, even if I was just a quiet observer standing at the edge. Meanwhile, I had started working full-time at a construction firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I liked the structure of it: plans, measurements, results you could see. Maybe that's why I never noticed how emotional cracks form, because in my world, if something broke, you could just fix it. In her world, sometimes you had to feel the break before you could even name it. At first, our schedules aligned easily. We'd have breakfast together, sometimes take evening walks. But as the months went by, my hours stretched longer. Projects piled up, clients demanded more, and promotions dangled just out of reach. I told myself it was temporary, that once I climbed high enough, we'd have the freedom to live the way we wanted. Sarah never argued, but I could see her eyes dim a little each time I came home late. One evening, I walked in to find her sitting at the dining table, a half-finished dinner waiting. She looked tired, not angry, just worn down in a quiet way that guilt can't fix. "I waited," she said softly. "I know," I replied, putting down my bag. The meeting ran long. She smiled, a small, brittle smile. "You always say that." I didn't have an answer. I sat across from her, and we ate in silence, the sound of the clock louder than our words. It wasn't that we stopped loving each other. We just stopped noticing the little ways love used to show up. She still made my favorite tea in the mornings, but I drank it while checking emails. I still kissed her goodnight, but half the time she was already asleep. Somewhere between our plans and our routines, we began to live next to each other instead of with each other. I think love starts to fade not because of big betrayals, but because of small absences, the missed glances, the unspoken questions, the quiet evenings where neither person reaches out. We tell ourselves we're just tired, just busy. But the truth is, every "I'll talk to her tomorrow" becomes another brick in the wall that separates two hearts. One weekend, She asked if I'd like to go away, just a short trip to the coast, a chance to slow down and reconnect. I told her I couldn't. We're behind schedule on a project, I said. Maybe next month. She nodded, but I could see the disappointment she tried to hide. That night, she packed a small bag and went alone. She left a note on the counter. Sometimes we need distance to remember what closeness feels like. I didn't stop her. I told myself it was fine, that she just needed space. But when I went to bed that night, her side of the bed felt colder than I expected. She came back 2 days later, quiet but calm. She hugged me and said, "I missed you." I said it back, and we pretended everything was fine. That's how we lived, holding hands through silence, hoping it would be enough. Months turned into years. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment, closer to her gallery and my work. From the outside, we looked like any normal couple, dinners with friends, family visits, photos on the fridge. But inside, our conversations became shorter, our laughter less frequent. I think we both felt the distance, but didn't know how to bridge it without reopening old wounds. We weren't fighting, and that somehow felt worse. Anger at least means you care enough to feel. Silence means you've started giving up. One evening, I came home early, which had become rare. The sun was setting, casting warm orange light through the curtains. I found Sarah sitting on the couch, staring at a painting she'd brought home from work, a stormy ocean with a small boat lost in the middle. She looked up at me and said, "Do you ever feel like we're that boat?" I didn't know what to say, so I just sat beside her. After a long pause, she whispered, "I keep trying to paddle, but it feels like the waves are stronger than us." I reached for her hand, but she didn't move. We sat there, the sound of the clock ticking between us, until the light faded completely. Looking back, I realized that was her way of reaching out, not for rescue, but for understanding. And I missed it. I thought being steady was enough, that as long as I didn't leave, everything would work itself out. But love isn't about staying still, it's about staying connected. Then came the year everything started to unravel quietly. Work got busier. Her gallery faced financial trouble. She became more distant, spending longer hours out, often returning home after dark. When I asked, she said she was helping a friend with a new project. I believed her because I wanted to, because believing her was easier than admitting that something had changed. I remember one night, I woke up and found her sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. I went to her and asked what was wrong. She said, "I don't know who we are anymore." I told her we were just tired, that things would get better once this phase passed. She nodded, but her eyes didn't agree. The next morning, she left early. There was a lipstick stain on her coffee mug, a note that said, "Don't forget to eat." It was such a small, ordinary thing. Yet when I looked at it, I felt a sharp ache in my chest. Love, once again, had become something written in passing, left on the kitchen counter between two busy lives. Sometimes I wonder if all marriages are like this, not broken by one big mistake, but slowly eroded by the quiet weight of time. We kept functioning, we kept pretending, but deep down, we were both waiting for something to change, for one of us to say, "I miss you enough to try again." That day never came. It's strange how a home can stay the same while everything inside it quietly changes. The walls still held our photos, smiling faces, sunsets, small vacations, but none of it felt real anymore. They were memories of people who used to know each other, framed in moments we could never go back to. Sometimes I catch myself staring at those photos longer than I should, trying to remember what that version of us had felt like. Life, by then, had settled into a rhythm, not a happy one, but a familiar one. We woke up, exchanged a few quiet words, left for work, came home, ate dinner mostly in silence. If someone had seen us from the outside, they'd think we were fine. But silence can be deceiving. Sometimes it hides 1,000 things that never got said. Sarah had changed, though she wouldn't have admitted it. She still smiled, still laughed at small things, but her eyes told a different story. There was a distance in them, as if her mind was somewhere else. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention, enough comfort, enough anything. So I tried harder in my own way. I worked longer, earned more, bought her small gifts she didn't ask for, as if I could fill the emotional gaps with material things. She thanked me, always gently, but I could tell it didn't reach her heart. Because love isn't about what you can buy, it's about being seen. And I think she hadn't felt seen in a long time. There were nights when I'd lie awake, watching the faint light from the street slip through our curtains, and I'd hear her breathing next to me, slow, steady, but far away. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to ask what was wrong. But something in me hesitated. It's strange. We can share a bed and still be afraid of speaking the truth. I told myself she just needed time. But time, I learned, doesn't heal distance. It feeds it. One evening, after work, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels too heavy. Her shoes weren't by the door. I checked the kitchen. No dinner waiting, no sound of music playing like she used to when cooking. Just silence. On the counter was a note. I went out with friends from the gallery. Don't wait up. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. She deserved a night out, some space. But as hours passed, and the clock hit midnight, something inside me began to ache. Not from jealousy, but from the realization that I no longer knew where she was, or who she was with, or if she was even thinking of me. When she came home, it was past 2 a.m. Her hair smelled faintly of smoke and perfume that wasn't hers. She looked surprised to see me awake. "I thought you'd be asleep," she said softly. "I couldn't," I replied. She put down her bag and said, "It was just a late dinner, nothing else." I nodded, and for the first time, I didn't ask for more details. Maybe I was afraid of the answers. The next morning, we acted like everything was fine. We had breakfast together, talked about bills and weekend plans, and went our separate ways. But something in the air had shifted, an invisible curtain had dropped between us. We could see each other, but we couldn't reach across anymore. Over the following weeks, her absences became more frequent. Sometimes she'd say she was helping organize an art show or meeting an artist. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything at all. I started noticing the small changes. How she began dressing differently. How she'd smile at messages on her phone. How she'd hum unfamiliar tunes while cooking. Little things that shouldn't mean much, but somehow do. I didn't confront her. Instead, I retreated deeper into my own world. More work, more silence, more pretending. We became two people coexisting inside a house filled with memories neither of us wanted to touch. When friends asked how married life was, I'd smile and say, "Good. Busy but good." And every time I said it, the word good felt heavier, emptier. There's a certain kind of loneliness that only exists when someone you love is still there, but their heart isn't. It's quieter than heartbreak. It's more like standing in a room that used to be full of music and realizing the song has ended, but you're still swaying to a rhythm that no longer plays. One Sunday, she invited me to her gallery's new exhibit. I almost said no. Work had drained me again, but I decided to go. When I arrived, she was radiant, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. She looked free, lighter than she had in months. And when she introduced me to a man named David, something in the way she said his name made me feel uneasy. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in her world of colors and art. I, on the other hand, stood there in my plain shirt and tired smile, feeling like I'd walked into a story where I no longer fit. He shook my hand, firm and polite, and said, "Sarah's told me so much about you." That sentence should have made me proud. Instead, it made me wonder what exactly she had told him. On the drive home, I asked how she knew him. She said, "He's just a friend. A photographer helping with the gallery." I nodded. I wanted to believe her. But belief, once cracked, doesn't seal easily again. That night, we barely spoke. She scrolled through her phone. I pretended to read a book. When we went to bed, she turned her back to me. A gesture so small, yet it felt like a goodbye I didn't want to accept. Days turned into weeks. The space between us grew wider. We no longer argued. There was nothing left to argue for. I buried myself in work, and she buried herself in art. Sometimes, I'd come home to find her already asleep, sometimes not home at all. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingered faintly in the air once or twice, but I told myself it was from the gallery crowd. Because the truth was too heavy to face head-on. There's a part of me that still wanted to fix things. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her. I bought her favorite flowers, white lilies, and picked up dinner from the restaurant we used to go to when we first met. I remember feeling nervous, hopeful even. When I reached home, the lights were off. Her shoes weren't by the door. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I waited. 1 hour. Then 2. Then 3. By the time the clock hit midnight, the food had gone cold. I sat there in the dark, surrounded by silence and the faint smell of lilies, realizing that maybe she wasn't coming home that night. She walked in around 2:30 a.m. Her eyes widened when she saw the table, the food, the flowers, the effort. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I wanted to surprise you," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with guilt, or maybe pity, I couldn't tell. "I should have called," she said, voice breaking. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She paused for a long time before replying. "At a friend's place. I just needed to clear my head." I nodded slowly, pretending to understand. But something inside me cracked that night, something I couldn't put back together again. We slept in the same bed, but we didn't touch. And when morning came, it felt like we'd both crossed a line we couldn't uncross. After that, she became even more careful, locking her phone, leaving the room to answer calls, changing her routine. And I became quieter. I didn't confront her because I wasn't ready to hear the truth. I wasn't ready to lose her, not yet. So I lived in the silence, convincing myself that pretending was better than breaking. Looking back now, I think that was the beginning of the end, the slow crumble that happens when two people love each other but forget how to meet halfway. We were both drowning, but neither of us reached out. Maybe pride kept us apart. Maybe fear. Or maybe, deep down, we already knew that love, once lost, rarely finds its way home the same way again. It started with little things. Things I didn't notice at first, because I wanted everything to be fine. I told myself I was being paranoid. But now, looking back, I realized that those small details were trying to tell me the truth long before I was ready to hear it. The first clue was a change in her laughter. It wasn't the usual carefree laugh that filled the room, the one that made me feel lighter just by hearing it. It was quieter, sometimes forced, like she was practicing a smile in front of a mirror before showing it to me. I thought maybe she was tired. Work had been demanding, after all. But there was something in the way she pressed her lips together afterward, like she didn't want me to hear the sound of her real thoughts. Then came the phone. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, now always face down. She would answer it in another room, whispering, her eyes avoiding mine. Sometimes, I'd catch her glancing at the screen with a strange intensity, as if she were trying to memorize a message she couldn't delete. I told myself again, she's just being careful, nothing more. But each glance made my chest tighten. One night, I came home earlier than usual. The living room was empty. No sign of her anywhere. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, but there was also something else, a hint of another fragrance, floral, but not hers, lingering softly in the corner. I sniffed, tried to convince myself I was imagining it. I stayed in the doorway for a few minutes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside, the quiet whisper of the house itself. Nothing else. I sat down on the couch and pretended to watch TV, but my eyes kept scanning the empty rooms. Another clue came in the mail. A small envelope, not addressed to me, slipped into the stack of bills on the counter. I almost ignored it, but the handwriting caught my attention. Unfamiliar, neat, deliberate. I didn't open it, but I held it for a long time in my hand, feeling the weight of the paper as though it carried a secret I wasn't ready for. It was the kind of silence that starts to speak louder than words. Then there were the late nights. Sometimes she'd say she was helping organize a new exhibit at the gallery. Other times, she'd say she was meeting a friend for coffee or dinner. I never doubted her out loud. I didn't want to appear controlling, or worse, paranoid. But every time the key turned in the lock after midnight, my stomach dropped. I'd lie awake in bed, listening to the faint echo of the front door closing, imagining the life she had outside of me, the words she said that I would never hear, the laughter I wasn't part of. One evening, I noticed her laptop sitting open on the kitchen table. A document was minimized, the title cut off, just 3 letters visible, LOS. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I forced myself to look away. I told myself it was none of my business. But my mind replayed the letters over and over. Los. I couldn't help imagining. Loss, lost, losing. And a cold dread settled in my chest, quiet but insistent. Then there was the photo. I was tidying the apartment one Sunday and found it tucked between the pages of a magazine she'd left on the table. It was just a snapshot, not meant for me, I realized immediately. 2 people, laughing, arms around each other. She was in it, not smiling at the camera, but at him. And for a brief, impossible moment, I felt like I wasn't part of that world at all. I set the photo down, pretending not to have seen it. But it sat in my mind the rest of the day, like a shadow moving silently along the walls. Other things began to feel off. Dinner plates would go missing. Cups would be placed in unusual spots. I'd notice her perfume on scarves that weren't hers, hear the faint vibration of a phone in a pocket that didn't belong to me. None of it made sense. And all of it made sense. I tried talking to her. I'd ask simple questions. How was your day? She'd answer with clipped phrases, and I could feel her mind somewhere else. Sometimes she'd smile, almost guiltily, and I'd sense she knew I was noticing, and she didn't know how to stop it. Other times, she'd avoid my gaze entirely. I wanted to believe she was just preoccupied with work. But preoccupation doesn't leave the faint scent of someone else lingering in the air. I started keeping a journal. Not for her, not for anyone, just for me. I'd write down times she came home late, notes she left, small inconsistencies in her stories. Each entry made me feel both silly and desperate. I didn't want to be the man who tracked his wife's every move. But I needed to make sense of the emptiness that had begun to creep between us. And then came the dinners. Simple meals we used to enjoy together became silent rituals. She'd eat quickly, checking her phone. I'd push food around my plate, staring at her across the table, wondering if she was thinking of someone else. Sometimes, she'd laugh at something I said, but the sound never reached her eyes. And sometimes, when she wasn't looking, I'd see her glance at the door, as if expecting someone who wasn't me. I remember one particular night vividly. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. I had been working late, exhausted, frustrated, but determined to reconnect. I had a small dinner waiting on the table, her favorite, carefully prepared. She came home, shoulders tense, eyes tired. I said nothing about her lateness. I just motioned to the food. She smiled faintly, but there was a hesitation in her step I hadn't seen before. I didn't think you'd wait up, she said softly. I nodded, heart tight, words caught in my throat. Dinner passed quietly, each of us eating without speaking much. Afterward, I washed the dishes while she disappeared into the bedroom. The empty house echoed around me like a confession I wasn't ready to make. Sleep offered no comfort. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, piecing together every clue, every fleeting glance, every faint scent that didn't belong. Sometimes I'd imagine confronting her, asking her to tell me the truth. Other times, I'd picture her walking away, and I'd feel a sharp, impossible ache, as if my chest were hollow. I realized that suspicion alone could be a kind of torture, slow, quiet, almost invisible, but relentless. I started noticing patterns, the nights she stayed late, the subtle tension in her voice, the way she'd frown at her phone before smiling. I couldn't pinpoint what it meant, but I felt it in my bones. Something was off. And yet, I hesitated. Because suspicion is a dangerous thing. Once you see shadows in your partner's behavior, you can't unsee them. And sometimes, the shadows grow longer even before the truth comes into view. I tried distracting myself. I went running, took longer walks, spent weekends catching up on work. But everywhere I went, her absence followed me. I noticed the quiet in the apartment when she wasn't there, the way the air seemed heavier, the faint marks on the counter where she had been. I began to understand how subtle clues can carry enormous weight, how small inconsistencies accumulate until they form a story your heart already knows but your mind is too scared to admit. And that's when I started looking more closely, not out of mistrust, but out of necessity. I needed to see the truth, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to know whether the woman I loved was still the one in the photos, the notes, the quiet memories, or if she had already drifted into someone else's story without me. It started to become impossible to ignore. The clues I had once brushed aside now pressed against my thoughts like heavy rain against the window. I couldn't pretend anymore that everything was fine, even if I wanted to. Every absence, every faint scent, every late message, they all began to tell the same story, quietly, relentlessly. One morning, I found a receipt tucked between her notebooks. It was from a small cafe downtown, one I didn't recognize. The date was from last week, a day she'd said she was at the gallery. I stared at it for a long time. The paper felt heavier than it should, carrying a weight I wasn't ready to lift. I held it, turned it over, memorized every detail, then carefully put it back where I found it. I didn't confront her yet. I wasn't ready, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either. Then came her phone again. It had been on the counter, face down. I hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, made me glance at the screen. A notification had popped up. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Red Heart." My hand froze. I didn't know what to feel first. Anger, fear, sorrow, disbelief. I put the phone down immediately, pretending not to have seen anything. But the words lingered in my mind, echoing over and over. "See you tonight." I had no idea who you was. That night, I tried to act normal. We ate dinner, watched a movie she picked, laughed softly at moments she thought were funny. But the image of that message sat like a shadow between us. I wanted to ask her, to confront her gently, carefully, to give her a chance to tell the truth. But fear held me back. Because sometimes, knowing the truth is heavier than living with doubt. Over the following days, I began noticing patterns I had once ignored. She would leave the room when the phone rang, sometimes closing the door behind her. She began keeping her laptop open on the couch, always minimized when I entered. I started paying attention to the small things, the way she laughed at messages, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when reading certain texts, the way she would glance at the door as if expecting someone. The weight of it all was quiet but unrelenting. I began losing sleep, thinking through every possibility, analyzing every detail, replaying old memories to see if I had missed something before. One evening, she came home later than usual. I waited in the living room, pretending to read, though I wasn't reading anything. The streetlights cast long shadows across the floor. When she finally opened the door, her smile was bright, but her eyes betrayed tension. "I'm tired," she said softly, kicking off her shoes. I nodded, saying nothing, though inside, my chest ached with a growing, unspoken question. "Where were you? Who were you with?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting my mind wander through every small clue I'd collected. Every scent, every late night, every odd behavior stacked together until it formed a picture I didn't want to see. I realized then that suspicion is like water dripping slowly onto stone. Alone, each drop seems insignificant. But over time, the stone erodes. The next day, I found another note, this one hidden in her purse accidentally left on the table. I picked it up, heart racing, knowing I was about to read something that could change everything. It was brief, written in familiar handwriting, but not hers. "Meet me at 7. Don't tell him." My hands trembled slightly. I set the note down, trying to steady my breathing. I stared at the floor, imagining the truth behind those words. And I realized that no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, the world was no longer the same as it had been yesterday. I didn't confront her that night either. Instead, I watched, silently, cautiously, waiting for patterns to reveal themselves, waiting for clarity to arrive in some tangible form. Because subtlety can hide the deepest truths, but it also whispers them in ways you cannot escape once you listen closely enough. In the following week, I began noticing small contradictions in her stories. She told me she had been at the gallery all day, but the gallery manager later mentioned she'd stepped out for a meeting. She said she was visiting a friend, but a neighbor had seen her entering a cafe I had never noticed before. These small inconsistencies gnawed at me, but I didn't speak. I kept a quiet log in my mind, storing each detail, hoping I could piece it together without confrontation. And then came the late-night phone call. I was home, alone, folding laundry when her phone rang. She picked it up, and for the first time, I heard her voice change, softer, cautious, almost rehearsed. "Yeah, I'll be there soon," she whispered. "Don't worry," she said again, repeating it as if it were a mantra. The line went silent. I felt my stomach turn. And in that moment, I knew the truth was out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I began watching more carefully. Every smile she gave, every word she whispered into her phone, every quick glance at messages. I started cataloging in my mind. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to understand. I needed to know if the woman I loved had already drifted beyond my reach. One Sunday, I followed her, not in a dramatic or reckless way, but cautiously, as someone would trace the footprints of a fading memory. I stayed in my car at a distance, watching her walk into the cafe she had visited before. I didn't go inside. I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding, watching her sit across from a man I didn't know. They leaned close, laughing softly, sharing something private. I didn't see betrayal yet, only a moment frozen in time, but my chest ached with the weight of possibilities. Because sometimes, seeing a truth forming is worse than knowing it has fully arrived. When she returned home, she didn't mention the cafe or the man. I didn't ask. We ate dinner quietly, spoke minimally, and tried to pretend life was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I could feel the distance not only in the space between us, but in the silence that had become our language. By the end of that week, my mind was a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't shouting or accusing. I was simply absorbing the quiet, unbearable weight of uncertainty. Every small clue, every inconsistency, every lingering fragrance had piled together into a single, silent truth I wasn't ready to face. Something was happening in my life that I could not fix with work or love or effort alone. The world I had built, the home, the memories, the life we shared, felt fragile, like it could shatter with a single misplaced word or look. And so I waited. I watched. I recorded the signs in my mind. I listened to the quiet, the rhythms of absence, the subtleties I had once ignored. I didn't confront her yet, because I knew the moment I did, nothing would be the same again. The first real confrontation hadn't happened yet, but the story had begun to unfold, and the cracks I had once pretended weren't there had started to show themselves to the light. And for the first time in months, I realized I was no longer living in ignorance. I was living in anticipation, the kind that keeps you awake at night, makes you question every laugh, every smile, every moment you once took for granted. I knew, deep down, that the quiet hints, the small clues, the subtle changes I had ignored for so long, they were not accidents. They were the first signs of a truth I would have to confront, sooner or later. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The night it happened is burned into my memory. Even now, I can feel the chill of the air, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the soft patter of rain against the windows. It was ordinary in appearance, quiet, routine, nothing that would have prepared me for the shock waiting inside. I had come home from work earlier than usual. The office had been quiet, the team scattered for the evening, and I thought I could surprise her with a small gesture, a cup of her favorite tea, the little pastries she liked from that cafe downtown. I walked into the apartment, and it was silent. Not the usual silence of a home where life continues, but the heavy silence of absence, of a secret waiting to be revealed. I called out softly, "Sarah?" No answer. The sound of my voice seemed to bounce off the walls, swallowed by emptiness. I set the tea on the counter and started checking the rooms. The living room was empty, the kitchen too. I noticed the faint smell of perfume, not hers. A strange, floral scent that lingered in the air like a shadow of someone else. I went to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, and there she was, sitting at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the screen as if it held her entire world. When she saw me, she jumped slightly. "Hey, I didn't hear you come in," she said, voice too light, too rehearsed. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, noticing the small things that no one else would. The way her hand lingered over the screen, the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremble of her fingers. And then I saw it. A message notification on her phone. A simple line, nothing dramatic at first glance, but enough to shatter the fragile calm I had been clinging to for weeks. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Red Heart." My chest tightened. I felt the blood drain from my face. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing, the air thick with the knowledge I had been afraid to face. She noticed my silence and said, "It's nothing, just a message from a friend." Her words floated in the air, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding like a drum in the quiet room. The tea I had brought, the pastries, the small gestures of love, all of it felt absurd, meaningless. Because in that moment, I realized something had already changed. She wasn't just distant. She had been hiding something. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I sat down across from her, watching, waiting for her to speak. I wanted to ask the question, the one I had been avoiding for weeks. Who is he? But fear held my tongue. Fear that the answer would be worse than my imagination could conjure. The hours passed slowly. She went about her routine, but the tension was unbearable. Every glance she gave me seemed calculated, every word rehearsed. I realized that our home, the place that once felt like sanctuary, had become a stage where truth was whispered in shadows. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail I had noticed over the past months. The late nights, the faint perfume, the inconsistencies in her stories, the secretive messages, they all converged into a single, painful understanding. She wasn't just distant. She was slipping away from me. The next day, I tried to find evidence, not out of malice, but out of desperate need for clarity. I went through her things cautiously, enough to confirm what I already suspected without confronting her. And there it was, a small, folded piece of paper, tucked into the pages of a book she had left on the table. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a note, brief, simple, and devastating. I can't keep doing this alone. Meet me tonight. Don't tell him. I stared at the words, feeling a cold wave of disbelief and sorrow wash over me. I wanted to scream, to throw the paper across the room, to demand answers. But I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the knowledge that my world had quietly shifted while I had been living in denial. Later that evening, she returned home. She was tense, avoiding my eyes. I held the note in my hand, careful not to show her, careful not to reveal the storm building inside me. I asked her how her day was, trying to sound normal, to keep the conversation mundane, to delay the inevitable confrontation. She smiled faintly, gave a short answer, and went to the bedroom. I followed her, and we sat on the edge of the bed in silence. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, deliberate. "Sarah, I found this." I placed the note in front of her. She froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. I could see the shift in her expression, a mixture of guilt, fear, and relief that the secret was finally exposed. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just sat there, looking down at her hands. I felt the room tilt, the floor drop away beneath me. All the small clues, the quiet suspicions, the sleepless nights, they had led to this moment. I realized that the trust one had built, the love I had nurtured, was now fractured in a way that couldn't be fixed by apologies or explanations alone. I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she whispered finally. Her voice trembled, but it didn't carry the warmth it once did. I nodded slowly, feeling a strange combination of sorrow and anger. I wanted to understand, to ask why, to demand the truth, but I also knew that the answers, once given, might hurt more than the waiting had. The rest of the night was spent in quiet tension. We spoke in fragments, careful not to release the full weight of what had been discovered. I felt betrayed, heartbroken, but also strangely numb. The person I had trusted most in the world, the one I had built a life with, shared dreams with, loved without reservation, was no longer entirely mine. And I didn't know if she ever would be again. In the days that followed, the apartment felt smaller, heavier. I noticed every detail, the faint perfume, the way she glanced at her phone, the way she avoided my gaze. We lived together, but the space between us had widened, filled with unspoken words and fractured trust. Even when we spoke, the conversation felt like walking on ice, careful, tentative, always afraid of breaking something. I started retreating into myself. I threw myself into work, into errands, into anything that would distract me from the quiet heartbreak surrounding me. But nothing could erase the image of that note, the words that had shattered the calm I had once taken for granted. I realized that turning a blind eye, pretending everything was fine, it wasn't a solution. It had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. And in that realization, I understood that life had irrevocably changed. I had crossed into a new reality where trust was fragile, love was tentative, and every small gesture carried hidden weight. I wasn't ready to let go entirely, but I knew that the world I had once known, the home, the life, the security, no longer existed. All that remained was the question of what I would do next, and whether love could survive the truth. The night after I found the note, the apartment felt different. The walls seemed closer, the shadows longer, the air heavier. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the words on that paper replayed themselves. "I can't keep doing this alone. Meet me tonight. Don't tell him." I sat in the dark, staring at the faint light of the street lamp through the curtains. I thought about every moment I had missed, every quiet sign I had ignored, every laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I realized that for months, I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, a life where I believed love was enough to sustain us. But love alone couldn't bridge the distance she had already created. The next morning, she woke before me. I heard her moving softly around the apartment, the clink of coffee cups, the rustle of clothes. I stayed in bed, pretending to sleep, but I was alert, every sense tuned to the faintest detail. When she left for work, she kissed my cheek lightly, murmuring, "Have a good day." It sounded normal, but my chest tightened. I knew the words were a thin mask over something much larger, something I wasn't ready to face. I tried to go about my day as usual, but I couldn't. Every conversation with colleagues, every email, every minor task felt meaningless. My mind kept returning to the note, to her subtle absences, to the faint perfume, to the smile she had given someone else. I realized then that suspicion isn't just a thought. It becomes a shadow that follows you, a weight pressing on your chest until it can't be ignored. When she returned home that evening, I confronted her. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply held up the note and said quietly, "What is this?" She froze, staring at the paper as if it had burned her. Her lips trembled. I didn't want you to see it," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "I can see that," I said, voice calm, though my heart pounded in my chest. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator, the rain tapping on the windows, the distant murmur of traffic. I didn't know if I wanted her to speak or remain silent. Both terrified me. Finally, she began to explain, her voice barely audible. "It started months ago. I felt like you were drifting away, and I didn't know how to tell you. I made a mistake. I didn't plan for this to happen." Her words were halting, fragmented, and yet they carried the weight of truth. I listened, not interrupting, trying to absorb every syllable. The love I had felt, the home we had built, the life we had shared. It all seemed fragile, suspended by threads I hadn't realized were fraying. When she finished, there was a long pause. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, staring at her, feeling the room tilt around me. I realized that this moment, this revelation, was the hinge on which our lives had turned. Everything before it had led to this point, and everything after it would be irrevocably different. That night, we didn't sleep together. I lay on one side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, while she curled up on the other, silent, tense. The apartment felt enormous and empty at once. Even the sound of her breathing seemed distant, like she belonged to a different space now. In the days that followed, life became a careful balance of routine and tension. I watched her, observed her movements, tried to measure the truth in her gestures. She tried to resume normalcy, but every smile, every word, every touch was filtered through the lens of betrayal. We lived together, but the apartment no longer felt like home. It was a place where secrets lingered in the corners, where trust had been quietly dismantled. I found myself thinking constantly about the note, about the man she had met, about the long months I hadn't noticed. Anger rose inside me, but it was quiet, simmering beneath a veneer of calm. I didn't want to shout, didn't want to fight. I wanted to understand, to reconcile, to see if anything could survive the revelation. But I also knew that some truths, once exposed, cannot be hidden again. One evening, I saw her phone light up with another message. I wanted to grab it, to demand answers, to confront her. But I didn't. Instead, I sat quietly, letting the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. She glanced at me, her eyes wide, guilty, conflicted. I nodded, a simple gesture, and she put the phone down. We existed in a delicate equilibrium of truth and pretense. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke beyond the minimal words necessary. It was the calm after a storm, but the air still trembled with the energy of what had been revealed. I began keeping a careful record of everything I noticed. Late nights, subtle changes, fleeting glances, unusual purchases. Not out of obsession, but out of survival. I needed to understand the story she had been hiding, to piece together the reality of our lives before confronting her fully. Because I realized that when the final truth comes, you can't run from it. You can't pretend it isn't there. You can only face it, and hope that whatever remains can be repaired. And yet, there was something else I felt, something I hadn't expected, grief. Not just for the betrayal, not just for the lies, but for the life we had once shared, the trust we had once built, the love that had been quietly eroded. I mourned for the small moments, the the breakfasts together, the quiet evenings, the laughter that had once filled the rooms. I mourned for the man I had been before suspicion and doubt crept in, before the note shattered the fragile balance I had clung to. It was the first time I understood that heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it is silent, slow, and pervasive. It fills the spaces around you, drifts into the corners of rooms, sits quietly beside you on the bed, lingers in the faint scent of perfume, in the echoes of laughter that no longer feels real. In the weeks that followed, every interaction was filtered through the lens of revelation. Even ordinary gestures, making tea, turning on the lights, adjusting the thermostat, felt charged with meaning. I noticed how she avoided certain topics, how she lingered over others, how her voice softened in some moments and hardened in others. The apartment, once a place of comfort, became a stage for careful navigation, where every movement, every word, every glance carried the weight of truth and suspicion intertwined. And I, too, had changed. I had become quieter, more watchful, more guarded. I didn't trust her fully, and I couldn't trust myself to respond without being consumed by emotion. Every day felt like a delicate balance. One wrong word, one misstep, and everything could collapse. But even amid the grief and the tension, there were moments of clarity. I realized that love, even when fractured, doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers, even when trust is broken, even when betrayal has entered the room. And sometimes, it is this lingering love that makes confrontation so unbearable, that makes silence stretch longer than it should, that keeps you holding onto a fragile thread of hope, even when the world feels hollow. I don't remember when the first tears came. Perhaps it was the night I sat alone in the living room, the rain tapping softly against the windows, thinking of all the small ways we had lost each other. Perhaps it was the moment I held the note again, tracing the handwriting, realizing that nothing would ever feel the same. The grief was quiet, unrelenting, and deeply personal, the kind that fills your chest until it aches, until you feel as though your body itself has learned the language of loss. And yet, I knew I had to face her, to confront the truth fully, not just through hints and notes, not just through suspicion, but through words spoken in the open. Because avoidance could no longer sustain us. Because pretense could no longer protect either of us. Because life, with all its fragility, doesn't wait for readiness. It only moves forward, whether you are prepared or not. That realization, more than anything, marked the true turning point. The moment when subtle suspicion became undeniable reality. The moment when everything we had built, everything I had believed in, everything I had called home, began to fracture before my eyes. And I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed the note were unbearable. Every glance, every word, every small gesture between us felt like a test, a fragile balance that could shatter with the slightest pressure. I watched her carefully, measuring her tone, her movements, the way her eyes avoided mine. And slowly, the walls we had built around our life began to crumble under the weight of unspoken truths. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. The rain was falling in steady sheets, pattering against the windows like the heartbeat of the world outside, and the apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls. I sat on the couch, the note folded in my hands again, and I spoke before thinking, my voice low, steady, but trembling inside. "Sarah, I need to know everything. No more half-truths." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes darted toward the floor, fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. Finally, she whispered, I didn't want it to happen. I never meant to hurt you." Her voice broke, and I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand explanations, but I couldn't. I could only sit there, listening to the quiet confession that carried the weight of months of deception. I asked cautiously, Who is he?" She swallowed, took a deep breath, and said softly, "It's someone I met at the gallery. We connected, and it got out of hand before I could stop it." The words landed like stones in my chest. I could feel my heart constrict, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. And yet, I didn't leave. I didn't shout. I sat in silence, letting the truth wash over me in slow, suffocating waves. "I see," I said finally. No accusation, no anger, just a hollow acknowledgement of the reality before me. I realized then that confrontation isn't always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, intimate, and unbearable. Sometimes, the weight of words alone is enough to break the calm you've been clinging to for months. We spoke long into the night. She told me about the months of distance, the loneliness she had felt, the quiet disconnection that had grown between us. I listened, absorbing every detail, every hesitation, every tear she tried to hide. I realized that betrayal is rarely sudden. It begins in small absences, in subtle distances, in quiet moments that accumulate until the foundation of trust begins to crack. I asked her why she hadn't come to me sooner. Her answer was simple, yet heartbreaking. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought, maybe it would just pass, that it was just a moment, a mistake I could fix on my own. I nodded, though my chest ached. I understood her reasoning, even if it didn't lessen the pain. Sometimes, love and fear become tangled in ways you cannot separate. Sometimes, silence feels safer than truth, until the truth becomes impossible to avoid. We cried together that night, quietly, without words. The sound of rain against the window filled the spaces between us. I felt the ache of betrayal, the hollow grief of a life that had shifted beneath my feet, and the lingering thread of love that refused to disappear completely. Even in her confession, even in her mistakes, I realized I still cared for her. And that made the pain sharper, more intimate, more unbearable. In the days that followed, the apartment felt like a stage for careful navigation. We existed side by side, but the trust that had once defined our relationship had fractured. Every word, every movement, every glance carried weight. I watched her closely, noting every subtle sign, a hesitation in her speech, a glance at her phone, the faint smile she reserved for herself. And I noticed myself changing as well, quieter, more guarded, more careful. I started sleeping in the living room, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The bedroom, once a place of intimacy and comfort, had become a reminder of absence and secrecy. I could hear her in the other room, moving quietly, and I felt a mix of grief and longing. Grief for the distance between us, longing for the love that still lingered in fragments. One night, I decided to confront the other truth, the one I had been avoiding. I asked her to show me the messages, the interactions, the proof I had been fearing. She hesitated, fear in her eyes, but she complied. I saw the exchanges, the subtle flirtations, the moments of connection she had shared with him. It wasn't dramatic or overt, just small signs, a quiet betrayal built over weeks. And it broke me in ways I hadn't expected. I realized then that the turning point wasn't just the note, or the messages, or the absence. It was the accumulation of all of it, the slow erosion of trust, the quiet disconnection, the fragile threads of love stretched thin. And I understood something crucial. Life as we had known it was over. We could try to rebuild, but nothing would ever be exactly the same again. We spoke again, cautiously, carefully, like two people navigating a minefield. We discussed what had happened, why it had happened, and whether forgiveness was possible. I didn't know if it was. I didn't know if love could survive what had been revealed. But I listened, and I tried to understand, because understanding was the only path forward I could see. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice the subtle ways she tried to make amends. A gentle touch, a quiet apology, a willingness to be transparent in ways she hadn't before. And I noticed the subtle ways I had changed as well, more attentive, more cautious, more aware of the fragility of trust. We existed in a delicate equilibrium, each day a negotiation between hope and fear, between love and the memory of betrayal. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, rain tapping against the windows, reflecting on everything that had happened. I realized that the turning point wasn't just about her actions, or the betrayal, or the secrets. It was about the awakening. The moment I saw clearly that life is fragile, that love is fragile, that trust is a delicate, precious thing that can be shattered in moments we never see coming. And I realized something else. Even in the midst of heartbreak, even in the quiet ache of betrayal, there is clarity. There is understanding. There is the chance to see who we are, what we value, and what we are willing to fight for. That night, I understood that nothing would ever be the same. But I also understood that life, even when fractured, continues to move forward. And I realized that the choices I made from that point on would define not just my relationship, but who I was as a person, how I loved, how I forgave, how I endured. Because the turning point, painful as it was, had opened my eyes. And sometimes, the only way to grow is to face the truth, no matter how unbearable it may be. The days after the confrontation were quiet, almost painfully so. The apartment, once full of life and small, comforting routines, now felt heavy, almost empty. Every object, every corner, seemed to carry a memory of what had been: breakfasts together, shared laughter, soft touches. And I realized that living in the same space as her now felt like walking among echoes. I didn't speak much, not because I was angry, but because words felt insufficient. I wanted to understand, to reconcile, but I also knew that rushing the process would be futile. Healing, if it was to come, required patience. Patience I hadn't known I could summon. Some nights, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. The rain tapped gently against the windows, a rhythmic comfort, and I let my mind wander. I thought about the months I had ignored subtle signs, the little moments I had dismissed, the quiet absences I had pretended didn't matter. I realized that denial had only prolonged the inevitable pain. Acknowledging the truth, as unbearable as it was the first step toward understanding. I began to focus on small routines, making my own meals, tidying the apartment, taking long walks in the park near our home. These simple acts became anchors, moments of stability in a world that had shifted beneath my feet. The physical movement, the focus on the tangible, helped me process the emotional turbulence inside. Occasionally, she would come into the living room while I was reading or writing in my journal. We didn't speak at first, just exchanged quiet glances. I noticed her efforts, subtle, tentative, to bridge the distance. A cup of tea left on the counter, a small apology whispered in passing, a willingness to be honest when I asked questions. Each gesture, though minor, felt monumental to me. It was a reminder that even after betrayal, the human heart can attempt to reach out again, seeking connection. I started reflecting on my own actions as well. I realized that I had contributed, unintentionally, to the distance between us. Long work hours, quiet frustration, my tendency to avoid difficult conversations, all had created gaps she had tried to fill in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Acknowledging my own shortcomings didn't lessen her betrayal, but it gave me perspective. It reminded me that relationships are never one-sided. They are fragile ecosystems, nourished or neglected by the choices we make every day. One afternoon, I found an old photo of us on the table, taken years ago during a trip to the mountains. We were smiling, carefree, the world seeming endless and safe. I picked it up, feeling a pang of nostalgia, and realized that those memories, though tinged with sorrow now, were still mine. They couldn't be erased by betrayal. They were proof that love had existed, and in some ways, that knowledge itself offered comfort. We started having quiet conversations, tentative and careful. No accusations, no recriminations, just honesty. She would speak about her feelings, her regrets, her fears. I would listen, sometimes responding with questions, sometimes just absorbing her words. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instantaneous. But each conversation chipped away at the tension, slowly, quietly. I began to understand something crucial. Healing doesn't require forgetting. It doesn't require erasing pain or pretending that nothing happened. Healing begins with acknowledgement, acknowledging the hurt, acknowledging the mistakes, acknowledging the emotions that accompany both. And only after that acknowledgement can we start to rebuild, cautiously, deliberately, with care. There were nights I cried alone in the living room. The rain, tapping softly against the windows, became a kind of companion, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat and sorrow. I let myself feel the grief fully, the betrayal, the disappointment, the loss, without trying to suppress it. And each time, a small relief followed. Not happiness, not closure, but the quiet understanding that I was surviving, that I was processing, that I was still here. I also began reaching out to friends, old confidants I had neglected during the years I spent caught up in work and life. Sharing my pain, even in fragments, was a release. It reminded me that while betrayal can isolate us, human connection remains a lifeline. Sometimes, just a quiet phone call, a short message, or a shared cup of coffee can restore a sense of grounding. One evening, she came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one down in front of me, and without words, We shared a moment of quiet understanding. The air was still heavy with the past, but there was also a fragile thread of presence, of acknowledgement, of willingness to try again. It was not reconciliation. It was not forgiveness fully realized, but it was the beginning of something that might grow into healing over time. I started keeping a journal again, this time not just to record clues or suspicions, but to process my emotions, my thoughts, my fears. Writing became a sanctuary, a place where I could confront my own heart without judgment, without performance. I could admit sorrow, anger, regret, and even lingering love, all in one place, without needing to explain it to anyone. I also learned the value of small, deliberate gestures, making breakfast, leaving a note, listening without interruption. These acts were not about reconciliation yet, not about erasing the past, but about showing presence, showing care, showing that life continues even amid the rubble of heartbreak. And slowly, gradually, the apartment began to feel less like a gallery of shadows and more like a space where presence, however tentative, could exist. The walls didn't carry the weight of betrayal as heavily. The silence was not as sharp. The rain tapping against the windows no longer mirrored just sorrow, but also the rhythm of life continuing, even after it has been fractured. I realized that healing is not a single moment. It is not a dramatic confrontation, nor a loud declaration. It is small. It is quiet. It is the decision, every day, to stay present, to reflect, to process, and to allow oneself to feel, to grieve, and to hope. And perhaps most importantly, I realized that forgiveness, if it is to exist, does not erase pain. It does not demand forgetting. It does not require the heart to be unscarred. Forgiveness is an acknowledgement of reality, a recognition that life is imperfect, and a conscious choice to allow healing to begin, however tentatively. In the quiet of those days, I felt something shift inside me. Not a return to what had been, not a closure of grief, but a movement, a quiet, steady movement toward understanding, toward presence, toward peace with the things I could not change. I realized that even in heartbreak, even in betrayal, even in grief, life carries moments of clarity, moments of presence, moments that remind us that we are still alive, still capable of love, still capable of growth. And in that slow, quiet acceptance, I began to understand the first lesson of resolution, that the heart can endure, that the mind can process, and that even after the deepest fracture, life continues, quietly, calmly, faithfully. The weeks turned into months, and life settled into a fragile rhythm. It was not the life we had once known. There were no spontaneous breakfasts in bed, no lingering touches in the hallway, no laughter spilling freely across the rooms. Instead, there were quiet mornings, measured gestures, careful words, small acts of presence that slowly began to rebuild what had been broken. I learned to pay attention to details I had once taken for granted. The way she brewed tea just the way I liked it. The way she left little notes on the counter, small apologies tucked into everyday moments. The way her eyes softened when she realized I was noticing her efforts. Each of these tiny gestures was a thread, and I began to weave them together, slowly, into a fragile tapestry of trust. We began speaking more openly, tentatively at first. Not about the betrayal, not immediately about forgiveness, but about everyday life, about meals, errands, small plans. Each conversation was a test of patience and vulnerability. I realized that rebuilding trust is not a single moment or grand gesture. It is a series of small, consistent actions, each one a promise kept, each one a signal that presence and care remain. One evening, we took a walk in the park near our apartment. The world outside was quiet, the leaves rustling in the wind, the distant hum of cars muted by distance. We walked side by side, not holding hands, not speaking much, just existing together in the same space. And yet, that silence carried something profound, an unspoken understanding that we were attempting, slowly, to reconnect. I noticed the subtle changes in myself too. I had spent months retreating inward, analyzing, observing, surviving. Now, I was learning to engage again, to speak without suspicion, to act without hesitation, to allow the possibility of hope. I realized that healing is reciprocal. It is not only about the person who betrayed or hurt you. It is about your own willingness to move forward, cautiously, deliberately, with intention. We started sharing small routines again, cooking together, tidying the apartment, talking quietly in the evenings. These acts were simple, almost mundane, but they carried immense weight. They were reminders that life continues, even after betrayal, even after grief, even after heartbreak. And they were proof that love, however fragile, could endure when nurtured carefully. I began to write again, not to analyze her actions or mine, but to reflect on my emotions, to process the complexity of the human heart. I wrote about sorrow, about longing, about hope. I wrote about grief and forgiveness, about trust and fear. And through these words, I discovered clarity, the kind that comes not from ignoring pain, but from fully acknowledging it, letting it exist, and then gently releasing it. One night, as I sat alone in the living room with the rain tapping softly against the windows, I realized something important. Healing is not linear. There are moments of progress, moments of doubt, moments of sadness, moments of joy. And that is natural. It does not mean failure. It means you are human, navigating the intricate terrain of love, trust, and life itself. We began having conversations about our past, slowly peeling back layers of misunderstanding, fear, and regret. She spoke honestly about why she had drifted, about her fears and loneliness. I spoke about my own shortcomings, the ways I had contributed to our distance. There was no blame, only acknowledgement, a quiet, powerful recognition of the human flaws that had shaped our story. I learned that reconciliation does not require perfection. It does not require forgetting. It does not demand erasing pain. It only requires presence, honesty, and the willingness to try again. And that is what we both chose to do, cautiously, one small step at a time. There were moments of tenderness, simple but profound. A cup of tea shared in silence. A gentle touch on the shoulder while walking through the apartment. A quiet laugh at a memory that once brought joy. These moments were fleeting, fragile, but they were significant, reminders that connection, however delicate, was possible. I also began reconnecting with friends and family, those I had neglected during the turbulence of our lives. Sharing my experiences, even in fragments, brought relief and perspective. It reminded me that love and support exist beyond the walls of our apartment, that the human heart is resilient, that relationships, both old and new, can help us heal. One afternoon, I found an old photograph tucked behind a stack of books. It was of the two of us, laughing on a quiet street years ago, carefree and alive. I held it in my hands, feeling a mixture of nostalgia, sorrow, and gratitude. Gratitude, because those memories were ours, untainted by betrayal. Sorrow, because they belonged to a past that could not be reclaimed. And understanding, because life is a series of moments, some we cherish, some we mourn, some we learn from. The apartment slowly transformed from a place of tension to a space of cautious presence. The rain no longer mirrored grief alone, but also reflection, renewal, and the rhythm of life continuing. I realized that moving forward does not require forgetting the past, only accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to exist fully in the present. I began to understand love in a deeper way, not as something constant or unchanging, but as something fragile and evolving, requiring attention, patience, and care. I realized that forgiveness is not an erasure of pain, but an act of acknowledgement and acceptance. I realized that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, slowly, tentatively, but intentionally, through consistent presence and honesty. In these months of quiet rebuilding, I discovered a profound truth. Even after the deepest heartbreak, even after betrayal and loss, life continues. The heart endures. The mind heals. The spirit learns to move forward, cautiously, deliberately, with hope. And though nothing would ever be exactly as it was before, I began to see that this journey, painful, reflective, and slow, had reshaped me. I was more aware, more empathetic, more patient. I was learning to hold love carefully, to listen deeply, and to cherish the fragile moments of connection that remain. The apartment, once a gallery of shadows, now held a quiet warmth. The rain tapping against the windows, the soft hum of life outside, the gentle presence of someone who had once caused heartbreak, all these things became markers of resilience. I realized that life, even after fracture, offers moments of clarity, presence, and beauty. And it is in these moments that we learn what it truly means to endure, to forgive, and to love again. I never expected life to teach me so many lessons through heartbreak. If someone had told me, years ago, that the path to understanding and growth would run through betrayal, I would have dismissed it. I would have thought love and trust were unshakable, that a home built on years of care could withstand anything. But now, I understand. Love is resilient, yes, but fragile. Trust, once broken, can be mended slowly, deliberately, with patience and awareness. And the human heart, even when wounded, has an extraordinary capacity to endure. I spent long hours reflecting on my own role in what had happened. I realized that I had contributed, without knowing it, to the distance that had grown between us. Long hours at work, moments of quiet frustration, times when I failed to listen or notice. All these had built invisible walls, walls that she eventually tried to fill in ways I couldn't have foreseen. Understanding that did not absolve the betrayal, but it gave me perspective. It reminded me that relationships are ecosystems, delicate and intricate, nourished by care, attention, and honesty. Neglect them, and even the strongest foundations begin to crack. I began seeing her efforts in a new light. The small gestures, a cup of tea left on the counter, a tentative smile, a gentle touch, were her way of reaching across the distance, quietly asking if the connection could survive. I realized that reconciliation isn't a single moment of forgiveness. It is a series of small acts, repeated consistently over time, each one a signal that the heart is willing to try again. I found solace in routines that felt ordinary but carried immense emotional weight. Making my own meals, tidying the apartment, journaling late at night, taking long walks in the park while the wind stirred the leaves and distant traffic hummed softly. These simple acts became anchors, moments of stability in a life that had been fractured by grief and betrayal. I also discovered the value of quiet reflection. I would sit in the living room as rain tapped softly against the windows, letting the rhythm of nature fill the spaces between my thoughts. I would think about the past, about the moments that led to our separation, about the choices I made and the choices she made. And I would let myself feel the sorrow, the longing, the grief, and eventually, the faint stirrings of hope. I realized that healing is not linear. There are moments of clarity, moments of doubt, moments of intense grief, and moments of unexpected joy. Each of these is necessary. Each contributes to understanding, to growth, to the quiet accumulation of wisdom that life imparts over time. I began reconnecting with friends and family, people I had neglected during the turbulence of our lives. Sharing fragments of my experiences brought perspective and relief. It reminded me that love and support exist beyond the confines of any single relationship, that human connection is a lifeline, and that we do not heal in isolation. We started having deeper, more honest conversations. Not about blame, not about recrimination, but about understanding. Understanding the choices we made, the moments we missed, the fears that led to silence. Through these conversations, I saw her humanity clearly, and I saw my own. I recognized that we were both flawed, both learning, both struggling to navigate the fragile landscape of love and trust. I began to notice the subtle transformations within myself. I was quieter, more observant, more reflective. I listened more. I acted more intentionally. I learned that love, to endure, requires not just emotion, but conscious effort, humility, and patience. One evening, while sitting alone with a cup of tea, I thought about the photo I had found months ago, the one of us laughing in the mountains, carefree and alive. I traced the edges of the picture with my fingers, feeling nostalgia, sorrow, and a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude, because those moments were real, untouched by betrayal. Sorrow, because they belonged to a past that could not be reclaimed. And understanding, because life is a collection of moments, some joyful, some painful, all teaching us who we are. I realized then that forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It is not about pretending that pain did not exist. Forgiveness is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of reality. Acceptance of human imperfection. And a conscious decision to move forward without letting bitterness dominate your life. The apartment slowly transformed with me. The walls, once heavy with tension and sorrow, began to feel lighter. The silence no longer carried the weight of absence, but of reflection and calm. Even the rain tapping against the windows no longer echoed only grief but also rhythm, renewal, and the quiet persistence of life. Small gestures became the measure of healing. A smile shared over a cup of tea. A gentle touch while passing in the hallway. A quiet laugh at a memory from years ago. These moments were simple, fragile, but immensely significant. They were reminders that connection is possible, that love can endure when nurtured carefully, and that life, even after fracture, offers moments of presence and clarity. I also reflected on the nature of heartbreak itself. It is not always loud. It does not always come with shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it is quiet, slow, and pervasive, filling rooms, lingering in corners, resting in the spaces where love once lived. And sometimes, surviving heartbreak requires patience, attention, and a willingness to feel fully, sorrow, grief, and hope alike. Through these reflections, I understood that life is not about avoiding pain. It is about learning to navigate it, to process it, to let it shape you into a person capable of empathy, presence, and deeper love. I realized that grief, betrayal, and sorrow are not the end. They are teachers, guiding us towards self-awareness, compassion, and understanding. In quiet moments, I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker, the wind move the leaves, the rain wash over the streets. I would reflect on my journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the grief, and the slow rebuilding. And I would feel a sense of peace. Not happiness, not closure, but peace. The calm understanding that life continues, that love persists in small, meaningful ways, and that the human heart can endure even the deepest pain. I realized that the lessons I had learned were profound, that trust is fragile and must be nurtured every day, that love is not constant but evolves and requires conscious effort, that betrayal does not erase the moments of joy that came before, but it demands reflection, acknowledgement, and patience, that forgiveness is not forgetting but accepting reality and allowing healing to begin, that life continues, even when the past is fractured, and each day offers the opportunity to move forward with awareness and grace. And finally, I understood this. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not holding on desperately. Sometimes, it is presence. Sometimes, it is patience. Sometimes, it is quiet understanding, the willingness to endure, and the conscious choice to rebuild slowly, deliberately, without forcing what is fragile to snap. As the months passed, I began to notice subtle changes in the way I perceived life. I realized that the past, no matter how painful, was no longer a weight pressing down on me. It had become a teacher, a mirror reflecting truths I had been unwilling to see. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the grief, they had all left marks, but they had also left lessons. I began to understand that every scar carries meaning, every tear teaches, every difficult moment shapes who we become. I reflected often on the concept of forgiveness, not the grand, sweeping kind often written about in stories, but the quiet, deliberate kind. The kind that does not erase the past, does not demand forgetting, but allows life to move forward. I realized that forgiveness is a choice, a conscious decision to let go of bitterness, to acknowledge reality, and to allow healing to begin. And through that choice, I found a sense of freedom I had not known before. I learned to cherish presence in its simplest form. A cup of coffee shared in silence, a soft word spoken with care, a glance that communicates understanding without explanation. These small moments became anchors in a life that had once been uprooted by betrayal. I understood that love is not always dramatic or visible. Sometimes, it exists in the quiet consistency of being there, in noticing, and caring. I also learned patience with others, but more importantly, patience with myself. I had spent months wrestling with anger, grief, and regret. I had replayed every detail of what had happened, every choice I had made, every moment I had missed. And I realized that healing cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced. It unfolds slowly, quietly, in the spaces where reflection and understanding meet. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window, watching the city glisten under the drizzle. The sound of rain tapping against the glass had become familiar, comforting even, a rhythm to match the quiet beating of my heart. I thought about everything I had endured, the betrayal, the silence, the heartbreak, the long nights of reflection, and I realized that I was not the same person I had been before. I had grown. I had learned. I had survived. I thought about the future, not as a return to what once was, but as an opportunity to embrace what could be. Life, I realized, is not about recreating the past. It is about moving forward, carrying wisdom, presence, and awareness with you. It is about loving fully, consciously, and carefully, knowing that fragility and beauty coexist. I began to see her not only as the person who had caused me pain, but as a human being navigating her own fears, mistakes, and growth. I began to see myself with the same lens, recognizing my flaws, acknowledging my limitations, and accepting my humanity. Through this mutual recognition, a quiet reconciliation began to emerge, not a dramatic return to what was, but a subtle, grounded presence that allowed us to exist together again. I discovered the value of memory, even painful memory. The moments that once hurt me became reminders of resilience. The scars, both visible and invisible, became markers of survival and growth. I understood that life is a mosaic, pieces of joy, sorrow, regret, hope, and love, all forming a picture that is uniquely ours. I spent hours reflecting on trust, realizing it is both fragile and vital. Trust, once broken, is never entirely the same, but it can be rebuilt. It requires consistency, honesty, and presence. It requires courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to risk pain again, to engage fully with life despite past wounds. One evening, I found myself cooking dinner alone, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I realized I was at peace. Not complete closure, not perfect happiness, but peace, the calm that comes from acceptance, understanding, and deliberate choice. I had learned that life is not always fair, that people make mistakes, that love can fracture, but that endurance, awareness, and presence can transform even the deepest pain into wisdom. I began journaling again, this time with gratitude intertwined with reflection. I wrote about the moments of tenderness, the small gestures that spoke louder than words, the clarity that comes from introspection. I wrote about lessons learned, patience, forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet power of living fully in the present. And through writing, I discovered clarity, the kind that transforms sorrow into insight, grief into understanding, and heartbreak into acceptance. I also began to see life's beauty in simple, everyday moments. The sun filtering through the trees during a morning walk, the soft rustle of pages in a book, the distant laughter of children in a park. Even the gentle tapping of rain on the windows became a reminder that life persists, quietly and persistently, despite our pain. Through these reflections, I realized a profound truth. Life does not wait for us to be ready. It continues, with all its beauty and heartbreak, its joys and sorrows. The choice we have is not to avoid pain, but to engage with it fully, learn from it, and allow it to shape us into wiser, more empathetic, and more present human beings. I began to see love differently, not as constant, unchanging, or guaranteed, but as fragile, evolving, and precious. I understood that love requires awareness, effort, patience, and courage. It requires the willingness to be vulnerable, to endure, to forgive, and to hope. And slowly, quietly, I felt a sense of hope return. Not a dramatic, all-consuming happiness, but a steady, grounded hope, the kind that allows us to face life with presence, clarity, and grace. Hope that even after betrayal, even after heartbreak, even after grief, we can choose to live fully, love consciously, and endure. I realized that the ultimate lesson of this journey was not about others, but about myself. It was about learning to navigate life with honesty, empathy, and patience. It was about understanding that human connection is fragile and beautiful, and that our choices shape the quality of that connection. It was about finding calm amidst chaos, clarity amidst confusion, and presence amidst absence. And in that calm, in that quiet understanding, I found peace. I learned that life is a series of moments, some painful, some joyful, some ordinary, some extraordinary. And the measure of a life well lived is not perfection, but awareness, empathy, presence, and the courage to continue even after we have been broken. As I sit now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I see the journey clearly. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the grief, the slow rebuilding, the quiet reconciliation, the lessons learned. I see the depth of the human heart, its fragility, its resilience, its capacity for love and forgiveness. And I understand, finally, that life is not about avoiding pain or clinging to what was lost. It is about moving forward with awareness, embracing the present, and choosing, every day, to live fully, consciously, and with compassion. I have learned that sometimes, love is not about holding on desperately. Sometimes it is about presence. Sometimes it is about patience. Sometimes it is about letting life unfold, carrying its lessons with grace, and allowing the heart to endure, heal, and grow. Even now, I feel the echoes of the past, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the sorrow. But I also feel hope, a quiet, steady hope. Hope that life continues. Hope that love, though fragile, persists. Hope that the human heart, resilient and aware, can endure even the deepest pain. And so, I continue, not as the person I once was, naive and unaware, but as someone wiser, more empathetic, more present, and capable of enduring. I carry the lessons with me, the memories, the scars, the joy, and the sorrow. And I walk forward with calm, reflection, and quiet hope, knowing that life, in all its fragility and beauty, is worth every step.